Reddit. What's the most heartbreaking story from your love life? Story number 1. I met Stephanie at a party in 2004, and we were together for 7 years. It was perfect. She was the love of my life. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. She was my best friend, my partner in crime, my teammate, my soulmate. We even had a dog. We were engaged only 3 months when Stephanie was murdered by an unstable person at her job at a mental health facility. Enter hell on earth. Now all I have left in my life is our dog, Dutch, the dog that probably saved my life. Story number 2. I engaged in a long-distance relationship when I was 15. Though several states away, we managed to talk several times a day. Every day. Her name was Sarah, and she was the first girl I ever told, "I love you." Through countless phone cards and several months, I remember making a big deal of our 6th month. Would talk for hours at a time, just laughing at the stupid stuff we would say. One day the inevitable happened, and Sarah broke up with me. She cited several vague reasons, and I finally asked if there was someone else. She said there was, which I found comforting. At least there was someone to be there with her like I couldn't. Heartbroken but consoled, I told her she was welcome to call me anytime she wanted. 2 months and as many conversations with her later, she calls me. I'll always remember it. My family and I were eating dinner, and my mom answered the phone. She looked at me and said, "It's Sarah." I was a little shocked and excused myself from the table. I ran around the house to find a cordless that worked and took it upstairs. I hadn't spoken to her in at least a month and was anxious to hear what she had to say. When I picked up and my mom hung up on the other end, I could hear that she was crying. She told me that she was in the final stages of her battle with leukemia. There was no other boy, she told me. She had only wanted to spare me the experience of losing her. She explained very little, just that she wanted to talk to me again and say goodbye. After hanging up the phone, I just sat there and cried. I'm 24 now, and I still have trouble dealing with this. I have no idea what actually happened because I couldn't get a hold of anyone at the number or the address. It's possible that she was just trying to sever contact with me by feigning a terminal illness. Sounds like a bad sitcom now that I say it. But to 15-year-old me, she died in a bed and I couldn't be there for her. My imagination was consumed with the feeling of loss. To this day, I can't watch A Walk to Remember. Fuck that shit. It's 6 in the morning and I've just gotten off of work 2 hours prior. I've had a couple of beers and under any other circumstances, I wouldn't have shared this story. For some reason, I thought it would be therapeutic. It wasn't really. TLDR. The first girl I ever loved died of leukemia. Edit for structure. Story number 3, decided to use throwaway. When I was 14, I fell in love with my best friend Amanda. We were together 24/7. We were adorable. We'd never leave each other's side. A few years pass, and we get a call that her mother had overdosed and passed away. We were 16, and my parents let her stay with us. We planned out our entire life together. We were going to move when we were 18, get married, and have kids. We were going to be together forever. Well, that did not happen. It was the day after her 18th birthday. I got a nice room at a hotel in Reno and figured we could walk around and see everything. We were from a small town. My mom decided that we could take her car and we started the long drive. About 3 hours into the drive, I got rear-ended on the freeway. The car spun out sideways and the front driver's side slammed into a ditch, causing the car to completely flip. I didn't have a seatbelt on and went out the back passenger window. I woke up. There was dust everywhere. I didn't see her. I look back and see the car upside down and tires still spinning. I ran over and crawled back into the car and tried to get her to wake up. There was blood and broken glass everywhere. I can still smell and taste the dust of the airbag and the blood in my mouth. She never moved. I laid there by her side until I passed out. I woke back up in the hospital with everyone around me. They kept having to push me down and tell me not to move. I had to find her. I had to know she was okay. No one would answer me. They told me to stay calm, that I had fractured my skull and I needed to be still. They gave me a shot and I was out. 4 days later, I woke up. I could barely move. That's when my parents came in and told me she had died right then and there in the car. The first response team told my parents that I had been found inside the car holding her hand. I have prayed every night since then, 3 years ago, but it feels like yesterday, for God to give her back to me. To this day, I know that it wasn't my fault. but I still can't come to terms with it. I lost more than a girlfriend that day. I lost part of my own life along with her. Story number 4. My boyfriend and I broke up over religion. We were in a relationship for 4 years, and a couple of months ago, both his parents, who are Jewish, and my parents, who are Hindu, made us break up with each other because both families believed that there was no future for both of us. His Jewish parents didn't want a Hindu daughter-in-law, and my parents felt the same about him. Although we had tried for the past 4 years to get our parents to accept the other, they never did, which always led to arguments. We continue to remain friends now, and it breaks my heart every time I see him because I still love him immensely. Story 5. When I started high school, I went from one private school to another across town. I didn't know anyone and was pretty alone, didn't have any friends, and I wasn't making any fast. Anyhow, I walked into my homeroom class and saw this absolutely stunning girl across the room. She had this auburn hair that was impossible not to admire. The teacher started assigning seats, and sure enough, he puts her right next to me. I was such an awkward kid, I had no hope that I would ever say more than a word to her. Homeroom was a 15-minute period of announcements and socializing, though. It took her all of 30 seconds to introduce herself to me. Every day I would look forward to that 15-minute period in which all I would do is sit and talk to this bright-eyed beauty. She was my first real crush, I'd say, and it became pretty apparent that the feeling was mutual. Most days she would grab my hand as soon as I sat down and write some sort of flirty nonsense on it. I loved every second of it. Before I knew it, the homecoming dance was approaching. I'd never been to a dance like that, certainly never asked a girl to a dance, but I made up my mind. I was going to take this girl. Every day I'd walk into that short period of my day, determined I would ask her to the dance, and every day I'd chicken out. Then one day she asked me who I was going with. I said I didn't know yet, and asked who she was going with. She told me about some other guy who asked her that morning. I felt entirely defeated, but I figured it was a lesson learned, a mistake I would never make again. But that date she went on turned into another date, and then into a relationship. She ended up spending the rest of the year dating that guy. The next year my dad was laid off and I had to go off to public school. I did much better in that school. I found a group of friends the first day. I also had a few girls chasing after me, so I must have grown into myself a bit. I still had a lot of friends in private school, and I went to the homecoming dance at that school the following year. She was there, and my heart stopped in its tracks when I saw her. She ran up to me, gave me a big hug, and we spent a good part of the night dancing together. She was single again, and came to the dance on her own as well. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I figured I would be sure to get her phone number or something, and maybe get together with her. Toward the end of the night, though, she went to talk to some friends, and I went with mine. I turned around. She was gone. No idea where. A few weeks later, a friend of mine told me that she'd asked about me. But by then, one of the girls who was chasing me had caught me, and I'd be in that relationship for a solid 2 years. 3 years later, I'm single again and in college. I'm driving down the freeway in a snowstorm with a friend, and a car spins out in front of me, flipping into the ditch. I stop to go see if the driver is okay and call for help. As I walk up to the car, I see that bright auburn hair that stopped my heart 4 years earlier, draped over the steering wheel. Sure enough, it was her. I know that since this is a heartbreaking thread, you've probably got an idea of where this is going. But don't worry, you're wrong. She came to as soon as I walked up, and it turned out she wasn't hurt too bad. She had a concussion and a few bumps and bruises, but altogether not in bad shape. I helped her out of her car, and she came and sat with me in mine while we waited for the cop's ambulance to come. We talked a little bit. She was in a bit of a daze. Then, the ambulance showed up, whisked her away, and before I knew it, I was standing in the snow by myself, then telling a state trooper what happened. I didn't see her for another 2 years. The next time, it was in a grocery store. I saw her and immediately noticed a gigantic diamond on her finger. For whatever reason, I didn't say anything to her that time. We'd run into each other maybe 4 or 5 years later, both of us with babies in our arms. Nothing ever happened between us, and I know it's not as bad as it could be. It's more of a story of what felt like fate constantly pushing two people together, and nature, circumstance pushing them apart. And while I don't regret where my life has gone, I'll always wonder what would have happened if I would have mustered up the courage to ask her to that dance. Story number 6. We dated for over a year and were each other's best friends. We completely understand each other, and we are still madly in love with each other. But it was best for us to break up because we weren't in the same place. She's 20 and wants to be married and have kids soon, and I'm 21 and wanted to date her for a while and get married and have kids around age 30. It was mutual, and we both knew it was best for us, so we decided on day to break up. On the last day of our relationship, I decided to take her out on one last date night. We spent the entire date thinking back and talking about favorite times together, things we'll miss about each other, how we've affected each other's life in so many good ways. I bought her flowers, took her to a nice romantic restaurant with live music, and went to see The Hobbit, through all of which we held hands. It was one of the most perfect, romantic, happy, and yet heartbreaking date we ever had. At the end of the night, we said our goodbyes as we hugged and kissed passionately for one last time and went our separate ways, never to see each other again. It was the hardest thing I've had to do to this date, but I wouldn't want it to end any other way. It was as perfect as a heartbreak could be. Story 7. I come from a family where you date within your culture. I went against that and dated someone outside of my race for 2.5 years. My dad did not speak to me for a good 6 months after finding out that my boyfriend isn't Armenian. I gave up my family respect, friends, and career opportunities because I truly felt that this guy was the one. In the end, I left him because he began to rape me when I would not give him sex when he asked and wished. It became too much for me to handle because I was raped previously by another boyfriend. Till this day, it breaks my heart and saddens me that he couldn't appreciate who I was or respect me. After all I did for him and for our relationship to prosper, he chose to fuck it up. Story 7. Some years ago now, back in school, there was a beautiful, lovely, and kind girl in the year above me, who for some reason I don't think I can ever fathom took a shine to me. We started hanging out a bit and talking a lot, and I was infatuated with her. We ended up getting romantically involved. She was the first girl I ever really cared about. I lost my virginity to her, and although the relationship eventually fizzled out, we would still talk loads for some time after, fast forward a year or two, and we hadn't spoken for a while. I come in from a night's drinking and decide to see what she was up to on Facebook. She'd died in a car crash because of a drunk driver the day before, and I found out in a stupor at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and proceeded to bawl my eyes out till the morning. As we hadn't spoken for a while, I thought it inappropriate to go to the funeral. Still think about her sometimes, but it's a tough story to tell people, so I just mainly keep it to myself. Don't drink and drive, story number 8. I was 16 and had just gotten my license, was in a great relationship with a wonderful girl of the same age. Her name was Emily. We were on our way to the movies to catch a late show. When crossing through an intersection, we were T-boned on the passenger side of the car. Her side of the car. She was killed instantly. And I survived. I still wonder how and why I survived. Why was she taken at such an early stage in life? I've moved on since then, but I've never forgotten her. Story number 9. I've already typed this out, so I'm just going to paste it again. My girlfriend and I had been together for 2 years. We lived together for a year, then I got a new job, and moved 6 hours away for the second year. That definitely wasn't good for our relationship, and we were fighting a lot towards the end. So, the last day I texted her, Monday. She told me she was going to a sorority event. She was pledging a pre-law sorority. So I said, okay, have fun. Her last response was, thanks. The next day, Tuesday, no response from her when I asked how it went. I thought nothing of it, and even thought maybe they had taken her phone during the pledge process. However, her mom texted me that night and asked if I had heard from her, which didn't sit right with me. The next morning, she didn't show up to work, and that's when I called the police. It was only then that I found out that she didn't come home Monday night as well as Tuesday night. I was at work that day, and I couldn't focus at all. I had no idea what had happened to her or where she was. Her phone was dead, and the police couldn't trace it. They could only trace the last cell tower she was near. I felt so helpless being 6 hours away. I was in constant contact with her mom and sister. They were putting up flyers, I was putting up pleas for help on Facebook, Twitter, etc. The next day, I didn't go to work and spent the whole day on the phone with family, friends, police, anyone that I could think of. Everything went through my head. She was kidnapped. She was in a car accident. Everything but suicide. Finally, I get a call from her sister Thursday night. They found her in her car 2 towns over in the middle of a field, and she had lit a gas grill in the back of her car and died from carbon monoxide poisoning. I was all alone hearing this news. I called my parents, and they couldn't even understand me. This was the worst night of my life. I flew home the next morning and stayed there until the funeral. Now the story doesn't end there. As soon as I get home, my dad tells me that he heard from the officer he talked to that my girlfriend was sleeping with someone I thought was my friend. I had no idea what to feel. Sadness, anger, disappointment. I felt like I still couldn't be mad at her. I even called the guy, and I told him that there's nothing I could say to make him feel any worse than he already does. He had a fiancée, and she had already moved out. I think the fact that my girlfriend knew she could never actually be with him was the last straw for her. But here's the worst part. She told him what she was going to do the day before she did it. We got her cell phone back and read through their last messages, and she told him. She didn't say where or when, but he still didn't tell anyone. He basically said, "Niece knowing you." I called him back, and he said he was too drunk to remember. Meanwhile, he had just driven home. I told him to not come to the funeral because I didn't know what my friends or family would do if they saw him. I haven't heard from him since. That was 13 months ago. I have a great group of friends and family that have been so supportive over the past year. I still talk to her mom weekly, and I still think about her every day.